I can never.
It's the thing,
Ready when you are.
I think pull.
Are you opening us up or am I, how are we gonna do this? All we do is call the order.
Yeah.
Why don't you open
I'll
us?
do that, sure.
Okay, whatever time Terry says.
And we are live, 3:32, nice. Good afternoon, welcome to our Tuesday, April 11, 2023 Curriculum Committee meeting. We will call to order and begin by introductions around the table, starting over here. Diane Potter, Megan Carlson, Becky Fless,
Tony V.
and our administrator.
Angela Hardy, Director of Curriculum.
Thank you.
Okay, today our first topic is a curriculum review. We would like to make some adjustments to our grade 5 annual puberty education units of study. And so because of that, I actually wanted to, it's not at the lesson level, but at the broader organizational design level, I wanted to bring it to the group. So I'm going to share. Terry, what I'm sharing here, is that showing up?
Yep.
Like, okay,
It
good.
is up.
I'll make it bigger. And you have it in front of you.
Mhm.
I don't know if that's too big. Okay, so I thought I'd provide a little bit of context. So there is a statute, main statute, that requires, they call it comprehensive family life education. And it does kind of go in a developmentally appropriate sequence, kindergarten through 12th grade. And as you can see here, we ensure that we have family communication, and that the students are building skills in communication, decision-making, healthy relationships, responsible sexual behavior with an emphasis on abstinence, individual responsibility, teaches skills for responsible decision-making regarding sexuality. Now, of course, let's be really clear, this is a kindergarten through 12th grade. So some of the things I just mentioned are not something we're going to be discussing in 5th grade. So, but I wanted to make sure you knew the statute and what's required there. And then, scrolling down, in the learning results in health education, I pulled out the ones that align to the grade 5 puberty unit from health education. So it says here standards HE1 health concepts and HE2 health information products and services. And essentially, if you look through these standards, we're really talking about healthy and unhealthy behaviors and relationships. That's the part for grade 5 that we focus on. Dimensions of health, so physical, mental, social, and emotional health. And students really learn to categorize those. What's a physical health? That's part of your changing body in puberty. What's emotional health? That's as you act and react to situations, and sometimes that changes through puberty.
Mhm.
And then social and emotional, that's really your relationships and how they change with your family, how they change with your friends. And the students kind of scenarios to categorize those, like what, so that they can become really clear that this is normal stage of behavior change. And then growth and development, how their bodies grow and change. So at the grade 5 level, we're going to talk through that, but that's really just about why is my body changing? What parts are changing and why? And then how do I handle that kind of emotionally and socially in a respectful way? And then the standard HE2 is focusing at the 5th grade level really on reliability of resources. So standards 2.1 and 2.2, and you'll see what we're really talking about is where do I get information? Health providers, trusted adults, family, and we try to help students understand that maybe like some forms of social media might not be credible sources.
Mhm.
And so that's really what grade 5 leans in on, okay? So this is where it's grounded in the learning results. I'm gonna pop up the family letter and I'm gonna talk through that. What we've historically done, probably since the beginning of time, actually not really, but Why, for sure. I mean, because I remember I was in 5th grade. I had a puberty unit in 5th grade. I still remember it. Did you have that?
Oh, yeah.
I went to
Oh,
the
yeah.
puberty unit with my kids because
Oh, there you go.
it was interesting. I wanted
Yeah.
to know,
What was going to be talked about.
Yeah.
Yep. So,
but I do remember it also.
yeah, and it's usually 5th grade because that's really, some of our young people are kind of going through these changes in 3rd and 4th grade now.
Mhm.
I probably always have, but we're just more aware of it.
I'm much
But
more
5th
aware.
grade is a real turning point, and it's
Mm-hmm.
before they go to middle school. So historically, you've separated the boys and girls, and then you have a little talk, the nurse has a talk with them and shows a movie about your
Mhm.
changing bodies and how babies are born generally, you know, the technical side.
Right.
And then why we use deodorant and what happens in menstruation and that sort of thing. And then over time, we've learned that it's not a bad thing to have boys and girls together and be learning about these technical things together. And there's a way to do it respectfully, create a safe space, not be embarrassing. We never shame or blame, none of those things.
Mhm.
And we always have the health professional in the room. And we really lean a little bit into more communication strategies, healthy and unhealthy relationships, which just includes friendships, right? Healthy and unhealthy friendships. And then reliability of resources, which, you know, we have learned over time is really critical. So there's been some updated curriculum available and we'd like to use it. And so I want to talk through what's different. Here's the parent letter we would send out. You have a copy of it. But basically it outlines what would be happening. So instead of 1 class period, we would have up to 3 class periods. And they may be over time, not in order, but like 1 week, one week another. And these are the pieces they're going to focus on. The physical, emotional, and social changes of puberty, probably all the things you can imagine. Separating misinformation from truth. Developing a positive attitude toward their changing bodies and social relationships. Just understanding how bodies function. Learn how to treat each other with respect, so just language, learning how to talk to each other. And then communicating with parents and other trusted adults when you have questions. Like we encourage you to go to your parents or your, you know, trusted family friends or the school nurse and ask questions. We see parents and our families as key partners, right? This is to be in collaboration with our families. And that if parents have or family members have questions about the unit or want to see more details, they're welcome to go to the school and sit with the school nurse and look at the materials. That's all transparent. Or if you just have questions, very specific questions, you want some reassurance or are not sure, then you can we would have them talk to the nurse. This classroom teacher will be in the room at all times because that classroom teacher has a strong relationship with the students. It's always good to have 2 adults in the room anyway during these kinds of conversations. And then there's that follow-through piece. So that's the letter. Then, what are we going to talk about? So I pulled that up. Make it a little bigger. So the curriculum is called Puberty Happens. The word sexuality is used. It needs to be used because it's about parts of our body that are changing, right? And we will use appropriate medically designated terminology for body parts. There is an anonymous question box that's built into this curriculum so that students can ask questions. A nurse can filter and read through the questions and then respond. We respond in ways that are in partnership with families. That's really critical. Like, we're not going to say one thing is right or one thing is wrong. We're going to provide information and ask them to have follow-up conversations. Here are the objectives. They're written based on knowledge and attitudes and skills. Heavily leaning in on communication, just awareness. It's really not that entirely different from what we had experienced probably when we were younger, except for it's both genders together. So you will learn about the male body parts and the female body parts in the same room. These are skilled nurses who are used to adolescence and know how to kind of manage that. You will learn about what are some of the things that are changing, like I grow hair in certain spots, or I get really emotional and cry at different times, or my friendship changes, or I want more privacy. And so those are normal changes, and how do you categorize those, and then how do you talk about that with your family so you can build a plan. And so that the other difference is, instead of just watching the old video that we used to watch and get the deodorant and the feminine hygiene products, we then say, well, how do we build these communication skills around this? The other thing that is a little different is that there's a little more parent notification. So you don't get just the letter, but there's an opportunity to share some materials with the parent. I pulled them down for you, but I'll try to grab them on here for you, but they're in different files. So I'll talk it through though. So this is an optional home activity, but it's called the interview. And it's situated within the puberty unit because it's about communication, but it's really asking the students to have these conversations with families. They do not have to the idea is not to turn it in and get a grade. The idea is to prompt conversation at home. Like, what was popular in clothing and music when you were my age? So those are easy things, right? And what did you like the most when you were my age? What did you like the least? Some families are already having these conversations. What do you want me to know about growing up? That might lead into a conversation. How old were you when you started going through puberty? Some families are more comfortable with that conversation than others, so this might be just an entry point. And then they might say, well, what do you consider in puberty, right? And so then they might have a conversation that's a little more personal, but it's happening in the home. The other material that I shared with you is called the Family Matters Parent Flyer, which just basically is a simple document that says we believe that you matter in the role of your child and their development. What are some of the changes they're going through? Physical changes, body odor, hair, friendship, things all parents know, but we're just reminding them that we're talking about it at school too. There are no manuals, so how to open up conversations with kids. Parents can take it or leave it, right? It's not an assignment.
Right. Yep.
A little bit of support for how to answer some of these questions. Sometimes they're uncomfortable, so like, what do you say? Here's a couple quick, easy hints on how to do that. And then some links. The American Academy of Pediatrics and why that site is helpful. Kids Help. Amaze, which is age-appropriate animated videos for youth ages 10 to 14, around topics that families might want to watch together and talk through. Human rights and Advocates for Youth. The Advocates for Youth is really like, if maybe you're getting into middle school and there's some other activity going on and you need some support as a parent, then that's a great resource for you. Without assuming that our fifth graders are in any state and ready for that. So that's what I like about this, that there's a support and guidance for the educator, so that they can navigate uncomfortable conversations or new information in kind of engaging, interactive, thoughtful, appropriate ways. We're attending to the health education standards in the statute and doing so in a technical way. We're focusing and leaning in on those relationship. So it's like the whole child, not just your body's changing, but your body's changing, your relationships are changing, and how you find credible information. I like that holistic approach to it.
Right.
And that it's done over time across 3 lessons, so it's not all at once, people don't have to be totally overwhelmed. And that there's family materials available so that we really are bridging and partnering with our families and not keeping them isolated or separate from this work that's important with our kids, because they're their kids. So that's sort of, I wanted to bring this to your attention and see if there's questions that you have that, you know, we should be thinking about and pursuing, or if you're comfortable with this.
I think it sounds great. Actually, I think that like extra critical thinking kind of nudge, that's good.
I'd like to ask that, that we, as the committee, watch these videos
Oh, absolutely.
between now and the next meeting, so that when we report out, we can, because I'm certain we'll have a larger audience, and if we can report out about what we
We
learned.
need to watch these anyways.
Yeah, we should be watching them anyway, right?
Anyway.
Right, but I think that could be helpful in our reporting out if we just take this and actually watch these videos. I'm sure they won't take very long, and yeah, that we should just be prepared, because parents are scared right now about what we're talking about.
Yes, which is why I'm making it really public.
Yeah.
Like, I get it, it's uncomfortable.
Mhm.
This is not, this is not a curriculum that's going to teach children or encourage children to go out and have sex and how to deal with that. This is 5th grade,
Right.
right? At 5th grade, we're talking about, here are your body parts. They can result in making a baby, but that's not the intent at
Right.
5th grade, right? It's your body is changing. How do you deal with it? You're going to have, there's going to be some things that are gonna come up
Right.
about your changing body and what that means and what's comfortable and uncomfortable for kids in 5th grade. And we don't want that to be secret. We want them to be well informed and not getting information or misinformation from sources they're searching on the internet
Right.
without knowing where that came from, right? We want it from a medical professional who's working with our students and so that we can share that directly with families, so that we're in partnership. We're each in this together. We're each helping your child become informed.
And that we're not in any way talking about gender identity. And
No.
none of that, that these are your body parts. This is what you came with. This is science.
Right, there's probably in these days,
Yeah.
kids may raise questions. Now, we can't control what kids raise for questions.
Correct.
Although there is guidance for educators on how to be responsive. They may say things, I don't even know. Maybe what if I don't like my body part, then there are some prompts in here about how to have a safe and reflective conversation with someone in your home about this, and
Right.
a trusted adult in your life.
Right.
But we're not gonna blame or shame anyone who feels that way, and we're not gonna, there are some words that may be taught. What is it? I can't remember what they are. If they come up. I should have looked.
I really like the frame you're saying, just to back it out a little bit. You'd said sort of like, it could be a difficult or challenging conversation for family, but also just to look at it as sort of like new information and new ways to talk about it. Because the kids have always had the bodies and everybody knows this, and the changes have always been there since the beginning of time. But how kids talk about it and learn about it is gonna be a new way of having that information
Right.
come out. Anyway, just to phrase it almost in that sense of, all right, this is new information in a sense, and so for families to be ready for kids to have more language around it.
Yeah, and like some of our nurses say, students have words that they use about their body parts that aren't medically technical. So we might not call them a breast or a penis. We might have other language for that. And sometimes they have to suss that out to figure out what the student's actually talking about. And so we do, in 5th grade, we do use medically appropriate terminology. And sometimes that is uncomfortable because that's not, we've talked about I don't know what they're called, woo-haws or whatever,
Yeah.
instead, because it
a
feels
change.
different.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah.
But, so that.
Terry.
I know,
Did you get her?
6-year-old.
Okay, like, I am not the one providing, I am not the trained nurse.
No.
I am, trying to make sure that we are following through with our responsibility.
Right.
And building our partnership with our families and being transparent. The curriculum comes in a binder. And so if someone really wants some time, they can set an appointment with the nurse and sit down and go through it. It's not something we hide. Or if you just want to talk through it, as we get closer, that can happen. The one thing I will say, this would be the first year of implementation, and we have a new nurse coming in, and we have a nurse that needs more training still. So we may have it may be a little differentiated this year. We may need to, everyone gets at least one of the lessons, and we're gonna, so by next spring, everyone has all 3 lessons. We haven't quite figured that part out. We're working on it because we're waiting to see the skill set the new nurse has, and how much time we can borrow of the nurse who's completely trained in 5th grade, who supports 5th grade classrooms. So like that implementation model, but we won't be implementing anything without a family letter. So families will know this is happening.
No, this is 5th grade, but it's late in the year. Is this given to 5th graders who start in September, or has it already been done?
We don't usually actually have the puberty lesson until May.
Oh,
Anyway, and so now what we're looking at for this year is to try to implement the 3 lessons within the May-June window. And then for next year, if this goes well, then for the next year, maybe spread that out a little so it's not as intense for trying to around testing season and all that. And maybe start a little earlier, do one beginning of April, one after April break, and one in May. It's a little less intense for the nurses, families have plenty of notice, that kind of thing. So the timing is still the same. We just would like to do more than just the one 40-minute episode of crash course. And kind of spread it out, give kids time to think and absorb it. Yeah, absorb it. That's a good way to put it.
Is there any way to have a parent meeting, a building-based parent meeting for 5th grade parents so that they could ask questions? I know it adds one more thing.
I
Already
can
burdened
raise
schedule,
that
but-
with the principal group. We've never had that before because we've always been the parents who have questions. When we always send communication out
Right.
before we do the puberty lesson anyway. This is just a slightly different letter. And we have always created space for parents to ask questions and have direct conversations with the people teaching.
And it may not be a great
Some of
idea,
it
I
is
don't know.
like, when you do that, we get like 1 or 2 parents. And so
And
what's the
then, yeah.
difference between doing that and having a phone conversation or having someone come in?
Right.
But I can raise it with the principals and ask them.
I mean, they would have a better feel for their 5th grade classes than we do, but I
Yeah,
don't
true.
know. This kind of education is pretty hot right now.
Yeah, always great to include parents, and I always liked being included. And certainly joining, PTA was really foundational for me in that. But it also sounds like parents can reach out to administration and to nurses to have like the kind of one-on-one or whatever that would look like too.
And that might be more successful anyway, because they might ask more questions one-on-one than they're gonna
Maybe they want.
ask in a group. I don't
Jamie
know.
Riggins is one of our school nurses. She could talk about this all day long. I mean, she's really well versed and trained and feels like it's she knows our communities and feels like it's an appropriate match to support what we need to teach and where our families might be comfortable with the.
Yeah.
And we're doing this off of statute that's been there for kind of
Oh, since
decades
2002,
at this
the
point.
statute's been since 2002, so that's 21 years.
curriculum. We've used this one before.
This is a slightly different
It's a-
curriculum, which is why I'm bringing it to
Okay.
you. We just feel like this one is more, honestly, the one we've been using is just so old. The video is probably the same video I watched, and I don't wanna tell you how old I am, so, it's just, there is a video with this, but it's optional, depending on the audience, but it's almost the same thing, but it's more current, more relevant.
When did this one
The
come out?
materials are more interactive and based, this one is like 2021 or 22.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
based on cognitive science and medical science. And so it has more of like, it's designed, the instruction is more focused on those best practices in hooking the
Yep.
students, interaction, learning how to have a safe and effective communication on tricky situations.
I like the symbols in the book. Those are
Yeah,
cool.
so, yeah, and
We'll follow along while you're.
yeah, there's
teaching
think
and-
aloud, there's, there are notes about, let me see if I can find that.
Just like little
I think it's the
tips
next
for.
page. Yeah, those are the 3 units, puberty changes, body parts, and changing relationships. Those are the 3 lessons. And yeah, these are kind of like teacher tips.
Yeah.
Think ahead, something to keep in mind when you're explaining the lesson. For someone who's been doing this a while, these are students feel more comfortable and anticipate common questions or respond thoughtfully, and they give some guidance for staff to make sure that they're not caught off guard. Be inclusive. Remember, you have boys and girls in the same room, so how to manage that effectively. And then tips for educators. And that's really like, a nurse is not always a trained teacher. And so how do they prepare nurses to work alongside classroom teachers to have it be a little more interactive? So it's not a lecture that we're lecturing to kids, but they're making meaning and making sense. Like there's one thing, there's a list of topics. There's a list of items, and then they have 3, it says physical, emotional, and social, right? And they're just categorizing them. This is a physical change, this is emotional change, this is a social change. And while that seems really simple, it's that interaction with the language, naming it, knowing it, categorizing it, and knowing what to do with it,
Right.
that normalizes it and helps students realize the things they're going through are not abnormal. They're not the only one. Everyone's going through this. But it's in a safe way and in a way that they would typically learn material, right? And so whereas a nurse might not be trained in that, now they have some tools to enable that. It makes it a little more of a seamless experience for kids. Like, oh, this is what we do in school.
It's familiar and
Yeah.
yep, done this.
I like that at some point they get across that social media may not be trustworthy.
Yeah, that's
To do
part.
that and everything.
Yeah, that's part
Yeah.
of it's part of both puberty changes and the changing relationships. It comes up twice. As like, where are my trusted health sources? Who are the people I can talk with? Or where do I look?
Oh, that's.
And it
smart.
might not be TikTok.
Right.
And you can tell parents that they are encouraged to talk to their parents.
Yeah, all of the materials say that. Yep.
I think that's great. Really
Okay,
important
any other
stuff.
questions? I'll follow up with the principals as you
Yeah.
suggested. You've asked them to watch the videos that are on the document I just shared out.
So that we can report out to people.
And then again, it all is grounded in the document you have in our statute and our learning results. And when we're ready, we'll make sure that the family communication occurs in a timely manner, so they have time to process
That's
and
great.
ask questions.
Drive-through advice, I like it.
Yeah, the family letter is a generic one we'll use across the district, but it'll be signed by the nurse with the contact information in case there's some questions.
Excellent.
Great, okay. Our next topic, and we're gonna kind of jump totally different. We're switching gears.
Switching gears completely.
So a lot of what's come up around curriculum is like our core instruction programming, math, literacy, or in one case, what does it look like when we're what do we provide in the special ed space to ensure that the kids are getting access to core material but have intervention materials so that they can reach core instruction more efficiently. But there's a lot of stuff that's in the middle, which is how do we know, like when students are not able to efficiently access, they're not on grade level yet. What are we doing about that?
Right.
And there's all kinds of words or acronyms that are used in our world, in education.
Only a few.
And one of them that keeps coming up, or two, is MTSS and RTI. So I thought maybe we would take like 15 or 20 minutes and just kind of go through an education around MTSS so that we're more informed collectively, because it's been a big point of focus for our educators always, but especially this year because we made some refinements. And at the beginning of the year, I shared with you the MTSS handbook and we went through it. But then I realized I never provided this broad context, and I thought it would be a good point just to hit pause and say, okay, this is where we're at. Sound good?
Absolutely.
Okay. And we've been doing so much policy work, I figured it would be a nice break, change of pace. Okay, so MTSS is multi-tiered systems of support, but it originally showed up in our field as RTI, or response to intervention. And what that basically means is when students are not able or are struggling with accessing what's happening in the classroom, math, ELA, science, social studies, is there a system of response? Do we have something that we're going to do about it to help these students so that they can learn the material at grade level, even if they're struggling in some areas? And then this little triangle showed up where it's like all students have tier 1, which is classroom instruction around the core, ELA, math, science, social studies. And then when we notice some students are struggling, which is going to happen, do we have a system, what they call tier 2, where we're helping them out? And if that isn't working for some of those students, it's a smaller group of students, do we have a system in place to help the most struggling students? And originally this was sort of designed for academic, and then it broadened for any academics, so it can include art, it can include music, right? And like behavior, all students are expected to be responsible, respectful, all those things. And here's how we're going to teach that. And when they're struggling, what do we do? And when an even smaller number of students are struggling with meeting those expectations, how do we support them? And then socially and emotionally, when they're having friend conflicts, when it's getting, heightened, how do we respond? So that's sort of the evolution using this triangle. And this is from way back in 2004, where the idea of response to intervention really took shape and is in a federal law or act that said, okay, we will have a process in place that will help us identify who these students are and systematically respond to them without requiring them to wait until they're failing so far that there's a discrepancy between their cognitive level or their IQ, which is malleable, and their achievement level, so that they then qualify for special education. So it's trying to avoid the wait to fail, where we say, okay, in 3 or 4 years, these kids will show such a wide gap between their grade level peers and what they're able to do, then we'll answer. So this says, we're gonna intervene sooner because we know sooner, and there's gonna be a process in place for that. So it's sort of, it's not a path to special education, right? It's like a way to respond before there becomes that need. And this is way back in 2004. So, we're almost 20 years in.
Right.
And so it takes the focus off the individual student deficits and then starts saying, oh, this might actually be a system thing. We need to look at the intersection of teaching and learning. Are at least 80% of our kids doing well in the core? If so, then we need to enhance or strengthen our intervention system. If not, then we have something going on in the core that we need to fix, because that's a big flag. And then we also need to have this intervention system. So it's looking at it from different angles, and it's saying it's not the kids' fault, it's a system that's supporting these students. And we're going to use the strengths of the student to build them up.
Is this an area, you know how I love the instructional coaches, where they come in a lot?
Yes, they spend a lot of time here. Yep.
They-
So I'm gonna give you a quick little video just because I think this sums it up really nicely. Hopefully I do this right, Terry.
Here, we'll look at a three-tiered model, often depicted as a triangle, as one example of how a tiered framework can be used as a school-wide strategy for instructing all students. All students will participate in Tier 1 instruction. At this level, they'll receive effective, differentiated instruction provided by the general classroom teacher as part of an evidence-based core curriculum. The evidence-based instruction offered at this level can be expected to meet the learning needs of 80 to 85% of all students. For students who don't respond adequately to Tier 1 instruction, more intensive interventions come into play. Tier 2 interventions build upon the differentiated instruction provided at Tier 1 by offering students more systematic instruction and interventions strategically designed to help them catch up in areas of difficulty. These interventions are usually delivered to a small group of students within the general classroom, either by the classroom teacher or by another team member supporting the teacher who has also been trained to deliver the interventions. Tier 2 interventions will be offered to the 15% of students for whom Tier 1 instruction was not sufficiently intensive to meet their specific learning needs. But here is a critical point. Students who receive targeted Tier 2 interventions continue to participate in general Tier 1 instruction. Tier 2 interventions do not replace the core curriculum, they supplement it. For example, Dennis has been selected to receive Tier 2 interventions based on the results of recent reading fluency data. He'll continue to participate in the 90 minutes of core reading instruction that is provided to all students in Tier 1 each day. But in addition, he'll spend another 30 minutes per day receiving targeted reading instruction at Tier 2. Under RTI, his opportunities for learning and for catching up to his classmates will have been extended. We've saved the most intensive interventions available for the small percentage of students who still lag significantly behind their peers in making academic gains. Tier 3 interventions supplement the previous tiers by providing the most intensive evidence-based interventions delivered to individual students or in very small groups. Again, the intensity of instruction at this level increases. The size of student groups is reduced, and their opportunities for direct instruction extended. Interventions in Tier 3 may be delivered by an intervention specialist or even a special education teacher. But again, these interventions supplement the instruction provided at Tier 1, not replace it. And students do not have to be identified as disabled in order to receive these interventions. Only about 5% of all students will require these intensive Tier 3 interventions. Of these students, only a portion may go on to require special ed services.
So that is true, although I will say our percentages are a little off coming out of COVID, okay? So they're a little higher in some spots. Do you have any questions about that part so far? Okay, so let me,
Makes
so
good sense.
as you can see what he just said, right? See, core instruction, ELA, math, science, social studies, it's for every single student, even if you're struggling, right? And then you add on supplemental support, and then you add on intensive support if it's necessary for some students. And what that looks like in this district is classroom instruction, including like music, art, PE, right? And then we have intervention or enrichment blocks with teachers at all levels, and they're called little different things, learning lab, well, no, that's something different. They're called, we call them intervention blocks in the elementary school. In the middle school, I think they call it IA time. And then in the high school, it's a lot of times students have study halls and then go see their teacher for that extra support. And then the intensive support is in our system, learning lab at the middle school and high school. Reach, which is our gifted and talented, right? Because that's also intensive support, but on the other end, right? They're not struggling this way, we're accelerating. Credit recovery is another way of Tier 3. I call them literacy and math interventions, but some people understand it as Title I. If your students qualified for Title I, that would be Tier 3. Okay, and it's meant to be flexible. It's not a life sentence. So as students improve, then they may actually leave the intensive support, have a little extra support with the classroom educator or ed tech, and then while also being in core instruction, and then eventually may just have core instruction support, and that's it. That's all they need to be successful. So it's meant to be fluid. We've been shifting our system to ensure not all of our students historically have always had core instruction plus. They sometimes have had replacement of core instruction for these support services. That has shifted in this district to have this model in place. All the research suggests where that's happening, students are making really good gains, and that's what we want to ensure that. Their active learning environment should be with their peers as much as possible in the core instruction, and then we fill in those gaps in these other ways. So then out of RTI came MTSS. And so like, what's the difference, right? So you still have core instruction, and you still have those tiered levels of support, but MTSS, yeah, it's kind of like a new buzzword, but really what it is saying, instead of just making sure you have interventions in place, you're looking at the whole system. And you're making sure that it's a problem-solving, dynamic system, that the educators are coming together in teams and always looking at the information they have before them and always responding and not just waiting until like the January assessment or waiting the next year, right? That it's fluid, that we have supports. This is where our coaches come into play a lot, with professional learning that is lined up with what the goals are in the system, and that there's collaboration, a belief that all students can learn, and a level of efficiency. So that's really the only difference between RTI and MTSS is it says, instead of just this triangle of interventions, we surround it with a problem-solving process, the people having time to do that, and a focus on doing that, and data that allows us to make these decisions in an ongoing way and not just like once a year. And so it's meant to be prevention and then intervention and enrichment, rather than just waiting at the end and trying to fix problems that have come up. So it is prevention for any student, not waiting until they get identified, like in special ed. Collaborative problem solving across interventionists, classroom educators, specialists, administrators, data driven. And ultimately, it can help us with our special ed decisions because we'll have so much more information about that learner that's much more focused, that then we are making sure we're getting, that the special ed team, if it gets to that point, is ordering the assessments that make the most sense for that child, rather than this huge battery of everything and anything under the sun. We have a much clearer picture about what's going on. And it's not a program or curriculum. We do use research-based materials to support it, but it's not like intervention is read 180. That's not what we do. It's about what is the goal the student has and how are we going to respond with what tool or what piece of instructional material. It's any student who's struggling, we try to intervene. It's not the same for every kid. We have different ways of responding. It's everyone's responsibility. We just take turns on when it's ours. It's not based on emotion or feeling. It's based on what we see to be true. And it isn't the pathway to special ed. It is actually our way to make sure we know the most about this learner, are responding. If this isn't working over a period of time, we may then access special ed, but it isn't just the way to get to special ed, right? We're trying to be as responsible as possible and prevent the need for special ed services. So only students who absolutely need special education are receiving those critical services. So there's this woman that like, I'm gonna show you her in a minute. She talks about it a little differently because sometimes our education world, we get buried, right? So she likes to use this like dental hygiene analogy. Like tier 1 is going to the dentist. You go for your routine checkups and your cleanings. And then they say, oh, you need a cavity filled or you need braces. If you need a cavity filled, the dentist itself can fill that cavity. It's the same as a classroom teacher responding to a student at tier 2. Sometimes you may need a helper, an instructional coach. Sometimes we'll use someone else in the building to support, and in this case, maybe add some braces and monitor that. But the dentist and the specialist are in communication with each other over the same person. And then, only then, when you need the intensive supports, like, ooh, I need a specialized surgical procedure, like my child's getting wisdom teeth out, right? We're gonna go to someone else for the wisdom teeth, not our dentist. But they're in communication, they share the x-rays, right? Sure. So here's a quick way of talking that through, which gives you some language and a framework to think about it.
I am Dr. Katie Novak, and I am here to talk about the importance of building a multi-tiered system that is not just focused on location. And to do that, we're going to introduce a dental analogy. Now, I have to admit, I am not a huge fan of the dentist, never really have been, but you know what? I have to go to the dentist. Everybody has to go to the dentist. The dentist is like the tier 1 of teeth care, right? Because you have a dentist who's going to be very proactive and preventative and teach you how to brush your teeth and make you floss, and they're actually, it's very database decision making as well, because they use a lot of universal screening and diagnostic tools to ensure that if you need targeted intervention and support, you can definitely get that. So their diagnostic tools are very evidence-based. One is the x-ray. We're all familiar with the x-ray, and then the other is that terrible thing. It's like a pick, it's a metal pick, and they shove it in your teeth, and then they know if there's holes there, okay? So think of all of us as tier 1 dentist patients, and that's fantastic. And then we get our x-rays back, okay? Now, my x-ray shows that I have a cavity. Now, here's the thing, is the dentist, who in theory is a tier 1 practitioner, is very, very skilled and capable at filling that cavity, him or herself. And so what we want to talk about is a tier doesn't necessarily have to be a different place, and it doesn't have to be a different person, okay? And it has nothing to do with any sort of label, okay? I can receive that cavity whether I have a very healthy set of teeth with just a little hole, whether I have a cleft palate, whether I have braces. So a dentist really treats all dental patients and then provides, again, very frequent progress monitoring to ensure that when there is intervention and support needed, that support is given. Now, sometimes you end up going to the dentist and you get the x-ray and the dentist says, oh gosh, you are going to need a cavity, but you're also going to need braces because it's really going to affect your bite, it's going to affect your breathing, and now I have to send you to an orthodontist. Okay, great. But guess what? You don't stop seeing the dentist. So in this point, I'm like a tier 1 dentist patient, and then I'm also going to the orthodontist for tier 2 targeted support. Now, here's the important thing about that. That does happen to be a different place, and it does happen to be a different person. But that is not a life sentence, because what the orthodontist is trying to do is to get the braces to come off, okay? It's a long-term plan, constantly looking at data, constantly taking x-rays, and then deciding when it's more appropriate for me just to be back in tier 1. Now, I never stopped tier 1. So all students are tier 1 students first. We want general education students to be tier 1 students. We want to build a multi-tiered system so that tier 1 environment is the least restrictive environment to try to get all students to learn together. Again, we focus on universally designing our academics, our behavior, and our social emotional learning in those classrooms to eliminate the barriers that prevent all students from learning. And then when we have a robust system of screening and progress monitoring students, we will have some students who are going to need some additional support. And to do that, they may need tier 2 services. Those tier 2 services may be done in the classroom by the classroom teacher in the form of accommodations or modifications. They may be done in a different place, but it's in addition to and not instead of. And it may be done by a different person. But really interestingly in this dental analogy is the dentist and the orthodontist are now collaborating. Now they're team members, and they both have these brilliant area of expertise. So when you're thinking about your speech and language pathologists and your physical therapists and and your special educators, they're still working together and sharing data and having conversations about students, because all students are all of our students. Now, let's say that I am a tier 1 dentist patient, and then I also am in braces, and then I get this terrible infection. I need a root canal. Now I'm actually going to 3 different specialists, but here's the thing is, it doesn't make me a tier 2 dentist patient. It doesn't make me a tier 3 dentist patient. At the time, I need additional services, and so I get them. And that's what we want to build in our school. We want to build a school and a district so that all students can get what they need when they need it, and it might be in a different place, and it might be in a different person, but it doesn't have to be. All that has to happen is when I need that support, I have to be able to get it, and I should not have to get it instead of, I should be able to get it in addition to. And so really understanding that the tiers are not a location, the tiers are not a person, and students do not belong to any tier, makes it so we understand what the vision is, what we're trying to build, what we're trying to do, and the importance of shared responsibility and working together in order to do that.
Just a little bit,
Just
she's
like,
a little fast.
a little fast, like a little too much dentist. Just a little too
A
much.
little uncomfortable.
Yeah.
My teeth were
too
starting,
much
I was thinking I
dentist.
should go brush my teeth.
Yeah.
Yeah. So just to reiterate, tier 1, when we say tier 1, which sometimes we do say in those monthly reports too, that is like what we plan for every learner in the district. And within that class period, each day, we're going to differentiate a little, right? We're gonna have different small groups. We might use different text to make sure everyone can read what they need to be able to read. We may mix up the period, but the goal is to get everyone to the same outcome. And then when we constantly look at assessment, whether we're entering our testing period, right? So we get some big assessment, or we're looking at the daily practice kids do. We look at that information and we say, oh, we have a small group of students or this student who needs a little extra support. I'm going to plan for that, or I'm going to work with my team and they're going to help me plan for that. And then when that's not, if that doesn't shore it up enough, then I'm going to have a team meeting and I'm going to use specialists across the building to help make a plan for the student, and then we're going to intervene. And sometimes that does mean the student goes into a different location in addition to the core instruction. We have this handbook that I shared with you at the beginning of the year that kind of gives us, it's a lot, but that's why it's a handbook, that gives us a little guidance on how to do all of this. And the reason for both the handbook and the practices and the ongoing learning and the forms and all that is now our system's is in alignment. What we do in tier 3 supports what's happening in the classroom and vice versa, so that we're working on that student-centered problem-solving approach, and people are collaborating. Like that's what Dr. Novak was saying, like this only works if we have time to collaborate, which is why it was so important to bring forward that prep time document, right?
Yes.
So you see, like your role as a board is like, oh, we have a prep time policy, we need to review that. Your decision around that impacts our decision to be collaborative. Your decision around staffing in the budget, impacts our ability to have time for collaboration.
Right.
So it's a system, it all pulls on one another. It also, the shifts have allowed us to be more consistent at the school and district level, support planning and monitoring progress, and just better use the time and resources we have more efficiently. So that when they're doing these tier 2 interventions, some of our students only need 1 or 2 weeks with them, some need 6 weeks, and then we decide, do they need more intensive support or not? And if we find that they do, then we bring this team together and they sit around a table and they have basically a case study and a form and a process, and they use a real process, and they say, what do we know about the learner and how can we narrow our focus so we're providing the most prioritized support to the student? And we set a goal, an instructional routine, and a way to check for evidence for progress. And And that's a system now that we're building out across the system, and then we set a follow-up date, because we're not gonna just let the student hang out with this intervention for months on end. We're gonna check, and is it making a difference? And if it is, that's great, and if it isn't, what have we learned that we can maybe shift again?
And we have all those supports in place to make
We
sure
do,
that
but this
happens.
has been the big year, we've like shifted the way all those supports work, and we now
Right.
have common forms and common language and common roles and responsibilities across our district.
Mhm.
And so I would say that created a lot of heartburn, especially at the beginning of the year.
Mhm.
And so what's resulted at this point in the year, we've learned, we've just done some debriefing with places. The common language and shared processes are starting to feel a little bit more normal. There's greater alignment, there's greater cohesion and support for students. There's a reference guide because we have the handbook.
Mhm.
There's embedded coaching. So those tier 2 plans that we have, coaches help a lot with that because they're just such experts in their field. And sometimes you just need a thinking partner as a teacher. Like if it didn't work in the classroom the first time, I might have 3 strategies, and if that's not working, now I'm stuck, right? So you need that thinking partner. And then the roadblocks we've been experiencing is we just didn't have enough time last summer. Last summer was like the summer of hiring, and right up to the day school started. So
Mhm.
as an administrative team, we should have spent a little more time around it. I should have organized that. A little more professional learning at the beginning of the year with staff. I think they felt like they were jumping into the deep end. And so it was just overwhelming. But over time, we've worked on that. We've pulled teams of teachers together here at different spaces, from different spaces in the district to like learn about their experience, to help them with a better experience, and to use some of the feedback to shift some of our practices system-wide. So trying to get that boots on the ground approach and feedback loop. Our grade spans are at different entry points, like elementary, middle school and high school have different levels of readiness and expertise in this, and that's okay,
Mhm.
as long as we all get there. And right now, there's just too many Google Docs to manage.
I
And
would say that's
so,
probably accurate.
yeah,
There's
and
a lot.
we have this online system that Terry and I have been building this year called Branching Minds that will allow everything to be in a single sign-on, one space. All of it filters into it, and so there won't have to be 25 million Google
Oh,
Docs.
that would be so great.
But it just takes a little while to build. And we also wanted to make sure it was gonna work before we put teachers through the effort of learning how to use the tool. So those are some things on the horizon for us. It's definitely, we were in March, and that's when we got a lot of ahas, like, oh, I see how this, all comes together. It's not that we weren't doing it. RTI's been around for 20 years.
Mhm.
It's that we're trying to create it in such a way that it's much more fluid and systemic.
Mhm.
And those shifts have resulted in some language like, we're feeling tired, we're feeling is there enough time? Or what's the result of that policy review? And,
Right.
things that impact you. And so we've done the mid-year check. We're going to be looking at some refinements based on feedback, and I have a little bit more feedback to secure. And then we'll update some of our processes, like we'll implement that software package to try to make it a little more streamlined, things like that for the coming fall. And that's it. Do you have anything that you learned from that?
Wait, you're using it on us, aren't you?
Well, one thing I take away from me is we all got so excited when we learned how to use Google Docs. That was gonna be like the answer of the year or the decade or whatever. And now okay, now we know how to do that.
Improving.
Now we gotta learn something new. We gotta do it better. And that's what we need to do. We need to just keep learning and growing and moving forward. And that's challenging but hopeful all at once.
But you have data that some kids are progressing through because of that.
We do. We have this one little student who has struggled the last couple of years, and we've tried some different things, but this year, like all of a sudden, we're like, oh my gosh, because of such strong collaboration and real clarity. We got into the diagnostic level a little bit more, kind of like what a dentist or doctor
Yep.
does. And now this young learner is just making these huge gains. And so, I mean, that's just one example. There's going to be other examples where we're still figuring it out.
Yeah.
And I'm looking forward to the end of year where I can start to see, like, do we have enough of those really positive examples that we're on, you know, that we feel like the proof is in the pudding, you know? But we are getting more of that. It's exciting. But we're not, it's not a refined system yet. I will be very honest about that. It's when you're working with hundreds of people across this district trying to all learn to do this in a similar fashion in a similar way, we're not gonna all be there in 6 months. But the system is getting set up to meet these goals.
Building the car and driving it at the same time.
Yes, and that's where a lot of the exhaustion comes in.
Right.
Do you think some of the, I saw some of the roadblocks, I think, with it were that it would have been good to have more prep over the summer. Is that because that's when we first onboarded it? And like this summer?
The new version of MTSS and the new forms and all that, yeah.
And now they've been doing it all year and it'll be more in the flow. And
Yeah.
we can identify communication areas, but yeah.
I think even in February, there were some pain points like, you know, and then one group of us just had a meeting and what was that? We're in April and they were like, oh, we're seeing all the hard work pay off.
Yeah.
And so
Makes sense.
it doesn't mean that we don't have roadblocks, but it means it's making more sense now. It's
Yep.
becoming more routine. We're seeing an impact.
That's really good news.
Yeah.
That's good.
So we just need to scale that up. Keep getting that everywhere, getting refinement around that. I'd say our middle school is making some nice progress this year from where they started, and we still have more work to do. And then the high school is probably the last stage in like really launching this, just because they're a different beast. The way they're organized is set up differently. So we have all the parts and pieces. So I know we're doing it, but to do it in a way where we're all on the same page is where we have a little bit of growth.
Nice.
But it's not something that requires materials, it's your way of doing it.
It's a way, well, right, because we've set up a lot of the system already with materials. That's why we've had so much of those shifts in some of our intervention materials that we've been slowly putting into place. So there's alignment between what we're using in the classroom. Not the same, we used to use the same tool in the classroom in every intervention space. Well, that doesn't make any sense. If it didn't work in the classroom,
Right,
why is it
why?
gonna work in a small group setting?
Right, that won't work.
So that's been shifted over the last 3 years, but now it's like a way of doing it, right? We're getting into the how do we document it? How do we talk about it? How do we spend time together
Right.
looking at that information and make decisions?
Do the kids know that this is going on? Or do they
I
just
don't
flow
know. It probably depends on their age, and the level of intensity. I think like our middle school learning lab kids probably do, but that's like tier 3 at the middle school level. You know, they're
Right.
more aware of what's going on. That's a good question. I don't know.
I think it would depend on the child.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, it just seems like part of their normal day, but it might be something.
Yeah, I mean, they know they're
Different
learning,
for
but they
them.
don't know all the behind the scenes work that the
Right.
teacher has put into their regular classroom, so that, I'm not sure if they're as aware about all the other steps that also go into their day.
Yeah, right? No, they have no idea.
It's a lot. It's a good question though. Any other questions?
An administrative kind of question, and
Yep.
that is that we have, our committee has shrunk by 2 board members, is that
Yes.
accurate?
Yep.
So we need to add.
Now that you have some new board members,
Correct.
Yep,
Yep.
we'll just wait for the designation around that.
Okay, I'll try and have that done by the next
Great.
meeting. Although it's fun to come and hear all this, I like it, but I can't do every committee.
Yes.
Yeah, that's not.
So that was really more just an informing and learning. The first part was getting your support and feedback, and the second part was really just making sure that we say these things, you know what they mean.
Yeah, right. That's awesome.
So thank you for your time. I'd say we're done, right?
Yeah.
4:37.
4:37.
Yes.
So we're 5 minutes over an hour. And our next meeting is May 9th. And I can't remember what we have on the agenda, but I have a few sticky notes upstairs that say these are some things I'll bring to Becky to see if they'll work for you.
Great.
We just have 50 minutes till the next meeting.
know.
That's right.
So we're
I'm
adjourned.
trying to decide if I
We
should
are
go home
adjourned.
and have
Thank you.
dinner or.
And then there's
Oh, I have
finance.
to take Fran to dance.
Yeah, I'm gonna.
Yeah.
Whoops. I'm gonna run home and run back. Yep.